Hello, everybody. Welcome to Talking Stuff on the podcast. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. That is Andrew Ellis. We are talking about Ohio State football recruiting as we usually do on the show. Andrew, how was your weekend? First and foremost, how did Mother's Day go for you? Did you have a nice time? Did you enjoy the beautiful weather? So on and so forth.
I did. Beautiful day. Got to see my loving mother. I mowed some grass, which I always love doing. So yeah, overall, a nice, relaxing, enjoyable weekend for me.
I mowed the grass on Monday afternoon. Beautiful day up here. And I agree that mowing the lawn is something that is wonderful. And I can't believe, if you would ask me, if you go back in time and talk to me 10 years ago and asked if I liked to mow the lawn, I would have told you were an idiot. But now it's like one of my favorite things to do. It's so peaceful and calm. And just, it's just you and nature, and really getting in there and cutting nature's head off. So
are you a push guy or a riding guy?
No, I got a rider, and I use the push mower in the backyard. Backyard's a little uneven and a lot of bumps, and therefore it's not exactly comfortable for the rider. But do have a rider for the front yard, which I generally find that I enjoy the push mower more. I could probably do without the rider, but it is much quicker when I'm on the go doing things. We got a lot of stuff to talk about when it comes to Ohio State recruiting, even though it feels like a little bit of a slow period right now. No real visits happening in Columbus because the Buckeyes are on the road evaluating players. Coaches have been on the road for the last 2 weeks. We'll continue to do that this week and then push toward the end of May as we start to turn into camp season. So not a lot happening right now. Ohio State is now the number 3 ranked class in the country. I think the last time we did a show, they were number 1. Michigan had a couple big additions in the last 2 weeks. Notre Dame picked up a couple commitments. They pushed ahead of Ohio State. Ohio State has 13 commitments. Michigan has 17. Notre Dame 16. So those things don't really matter because once Ohio State gets to that same level, their quality of per player average will push them back ahead of those teams. But one thing I wanted to start with, Andrew, because it just feels like the right thing to do. Bill and I talked on the podcast daily on Monday about the quarterback room and where things are going, the state of the position. And it's apropos, I guess, because we watched Dylan Raiola commit to Georgia on Monday afternoon. Ohio State has obviously moved on and has a new commitment in the class of 2024 quarterback from Noland. He went head-to-head, mano-a-mano, however you want to call it, with Jaden Davis and others at the Elite 11 quarterback camp in Atlanta over the weekend. And Air was the guy who won the invitation to the National Elite 11 finals in LA, which feels like a big deal, right? I mean, is it a big deal? Let's just start there. Do you think that it matters to get invited to that, number one, but also number two, how much stock should we put into the conversation around this being a head-to-head battle with Jaden Davis, the Michigan commit?
I mean, you always like to see the Ohio State commitments get accolades and get invited to those types of events. I do think before the regionals start, there's sort of like a plan in place for which guys are probably going to get invited to the next round or whatever. So when you take that into consideration, I guess it's a little bit hard to get too excited about it. But in this case, he was going head to head with another highly touted quarterback who just so happens to be committed to Michigan. And Noland is the one that came away with the invite to the finals. Now, do we think Jaden Davis is probably going to get an invite as well? That's certainly possible here in the next week or whatever. But I mean, I think it's a pretty big deal. You always like to see those head-to-head wins. Now, I will say, when it comes to the Elite 11 finals, and Caleb Williams is a freak show, by the way. He's going to be the number 1 pick. But when he was in the Elite 11 finals a while back, should not have won the finals. So I don't know. I think it's okay to put a little stock into it, but it's not the end-all be-all by any means.
Yeah, the National Elite 11, the finals, when they run them, like 50% of who wins that is determined on their high school tape. And if that's the case, Aaron Noland has a great shot to win it all because his high school tape is certainly as impressive as anybody in the country, what he did leading his team to an undefeated 15-0 state championship a year ago. Certainly, this camp was in Atlanta. He maybe got a little home cook in there. And I don't think, honestly, from a individual perspective, I don't think these guys care. It's not, I'm going against Jaden Davis or I'm going against Aaron Noland. I think sometimes because of what's been created in the media landscape over the last 2 months since the whole thing unfurled with the quarterbacks and how, Jaden, there was being basically propped up and saying Ohio State was pushing hard and wanted Jaden Davis and he spurned them or whatever, which is not entirely accurate or even a little bit accurate, to be honest, in the last 2 months. I think that's what puts the spotlight on these sort of things. And that's why you see headlines like Ohio State commit versus Michigan commit. Those guys are not really competing in that perspective right now. From that perspective, it's like, how do we get better? From talking to people who were there in Atlanta, seeing the reports online, it seems like Aaron Noland had a pretty darn good day, and is what people are really realizing he is, which is that, he's got that height. He's 6'2.5", 6'3", but he's got a quick release, accurate passer. And really, that's what Ohio State liked about him. They liked the fact that he's a quick processor with the decisions that he makes with the ball. And from watching highlights and what we saw from Elite 11, preview or highlights and stuff like that, it certainly looked like he was doing that all weekend.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say that Ohio State and Michigan are both getting very good quarterbacks for the 2024 class. In terms of like head-to-head or ranking, it just depends on who you ask. If you ask an Ohio State fan, they're probably going to say Jaden Davis peaked as a sophomore. That's around the time Ohio State offered him. Aaron Noland puts up ridiculous stats in a competitive league. They're both good quarterbacks. So that's where I'm at with this.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be like a personal vendetta, I guess, is what I want people to realize. Like, it shouldn't be that way. Jaden Davis is a great kid. His family's awesome. Like, they're going to have a great situation for him at Michigan. Ohio State is thrilled with what they got with Aaron Noland, and a kid that is moving up in the national recruiting rankings and seemingly impressing people everywhere he goes. He was dynamic at the Rivals camp in Atlanta a month ago. Obviously, same thing at the Elite 11. We'll see how he stacks up in California in early July at the national camp. But if we have seen any indication of what to expect from Aaron Noland at this point, it's that he's going to be ready to go and willing and eager to compete. So it does. I brought up the Dylan Raiola thing because it is interesting, Andrew, as we talk stuff on this Monday afternoon on the podcast, that Dylan Raiola made his announcement, his second commitment on Monday. He committed to Georgia. It is not a surprise. The Bulldogs have been the favorite since he decommitted from Ohio State, according to most people. I know there was discussion about Nebraska, obviously for family reasons, some moments where people were talking about USC or Oregon, but this seemed like it was going to be Georgia from the jump. And the timing of it is interesting because Dylan is expected in Athens this coming weekend. And so is Ohio State five-star commitment, Jeremiah Smith, who will be making an official visit to Athens with the Bulldogs this coming weekend with Raiola and every other Georgia commit there. And I don't think the timing is coincidental for when Georgia asked Raiola to pull the trigger here. So how do we want to approach this? Like, should people worry? No. Are they going to worry? Yes. And it's also easy to understand why they do, because we see Jeremiah acknowledging on Twitter, like the eyeball tweets and, and then saying, I'm just having fun. Like, but this is not fun to the average fan who has to wonder, like, how is the number one ranked receiver in the country, a top 10 receiver recruit in the history of college football recruiting? Is he going to stick? Is he going to stick? Like, how annoying is this for you?
It's pretty annoying. First of all, if you're Kirby Smart and you planned it this way to kind of have this happen leading up to this big weekend, then that's props to Kirby Smart. I would hope Ryan Day would do the
He ain't Kirby dumb. You know what I mean?
Yeah, nailed it. But this seems to be this trend of like Jeremiah Smith will tweet something, whether it's eyeballs or the thinking, whatever the hell, ponder emoji. And then Ohio State fans will, tweet at him. He'll delete the tweet. And it's just, this is going to go on for God knows how long now. I don't know. If I'm speaking as the Ohio State fan, if Ohio State is recruiting against Georgia for an edge guy like a Damon Wilson or an offensive lineman like an Ernest Green or Kendall Milton, a running back, those types of things, that's where I really would be, concerned. With a receiver, that level of concern is down just because Brian Hartline is, he's still Ohio State's wide receivers coach / offensive coordinator. He's the one that has that relationship with Jeremiah Smith. So I'm not in panic mode with this, although I will admit that it's going to be annoying for the next several months, probably.
Yeah, I mean, you can't fault a kid for doing due diligence if that's what he's doing. Making other visits. He's going to end up making an official visit to Florida after Georgia is done. I'm sure he'll be back at Miami at some point, despite tweets saying he'll never go to Miami again. I'm sure he'll, tweet about other schools still. That's just going to happen. And in the year 2023, college football recruiting is not for the faint of heart. If you are a fan of Ohio State or any other school in the country, I mean, think about it from like Georgia has had a commitment from Peyton Woodyard for what, 5 months now, and now all of a sudden he's going to take official visits to Ohio State and Alabama. Like, this is just the way it's going to be when you're competing for those 5-star type players. These kids are going to make visits to these handful of schools all the time, and it's going to be frustrating. You're going to see a lot of, I don't want to say clickbait because I don't really understand the definition of clickbait, but you're going to see a lot of people taking things out of context. You're going to see a lot of people using Jeremiah Smith's photo and a tweet and a comment from him or one sentence from him to, gin up graphics or create drama or that's just the way it goes. And we can say it over and over. What Jeremiah Smith has said repeatedly is that if Brian Hartline and Ryan Day are at Ohio State, he is going to Ohio State. So there is no reason to handle that or believe differently when that is what it is. Andrew, I want to know, do you think that on Saturday when Aaron Noland won the Elite 11 competition in Atlanta and Jeremiah Smith immediately tweeted QB1, quote tweeting a tweet about Aaron Noland's win, do you think that's unintentional? Or do you think that is him trying to promote his guy because he like this idea that he wants to play with Dylan Raiola? I just think is made up out of whole cloth. Like, I don't think it's a big thing to him. Yeah, he committed to Ohio State when Raiola was committed, but he already knew at that time Raiola was decommitting, and that happened 3 days later. Do you think he cares really about playing with Dylan Raiola?
No, not at all. And I definitely think his tweet with regards to Aaron Noland was intentional. He's built up a relationship there. But yeah, I think like we knew that Jeremiah Smith was going to commit to Ohio State well before we thought that Dylan Raiola was going to commit to Ohio State. So like right. You said, it wasn't like he was just following Raiola's lead or anything like that. I think he's, propping up the Ohio State commits, propping up Aaron Noland, who's a hell of a quarterback and going to be his quarterback. And then he's also just being a teenager on Twitter, which he is in fact a teenager. So allow him to be a teenager on Twitter.
Hold on, I'm fact checking that. Fact checking. Yeah. Okay. He is a teenager. Wait. Also on Twitter. Yeah. So that's true. That works out. Facts.
Yeah. But
it's very annoying. It is very annoying though. And fans are going to have to just deal with it. And you can either make it worse or you can just be good about it and say, hey, this is a kid going through a once in a lifetime experience, receiving who knows what to make these visits in a situation where anyone among us would be doing the same thing. If you had these schools saying, hey, you know what, come take a trip and we may or may not have something for you when you arrive. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Like, why would you not do it? Why would you not?
No, I would be there. Like right now, if Kentucky offered me a PS5 to head down to Lexington, I'd be there tomorrow. But I don't know. I think
Vince Merrill may be able to work that out for you.
Yeah, I know. Maybe he'll text me later. We'll see. But with Smith, I think we've talked about who's the main competition, and it seems like first it was Miami, then there was talk about Florida, and who knows? Maybe it's been Georgia all along. I do think this Raiola stuff probably does solidify Georgia as the main competition, but he's going to get to Florida, he's going to get to Miami, and people will worry, and then he'll sign with Ohio State in December, and everybody will be happy and jolly.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think that it is one of those hard and fast rules in recruiting. There always has to be a second team. There always has to be a number two. I don't believe that there's any real reason to be concerned about Jeremiah Smith. But as I said on the message board at ohiostate.rivals.com earlier on Monday, when Georgia's involved, it is going to be a little bit uncomfortable. That's just the way it is. I mean, they are the two-time national champion. They have a very well-oiled recruiting machine that operates at an extremely high level. But what they don't have is a receiver drafted in the first round in the last 10 years, or a quarterback drafted in the first round in the last 10 years. And When I look at a quarterback wide receiver situation for anyone around the country, it is hard to beat Ohio State. So that is what it is. I think people get so caught up in worrying about Jeremiah Smith that sometimes they don't think about Milan Graham and they'll wonder, like, oh, what's going on with him this weekend. Milan does not talk much on the recruiting side of things. He's not that interested in it. It's not like he's out there retweeting eyeballs and all that kind of stuff. But then you see a photo of him at Miami on Saturday, and you're like, what the heck? How did he get to Miami? But he's down there visiting Florida and Miami with a couple teammates on a tour with his wide receivers coach and teammates like Bronte Johnson, who is a player I really think Ohio State wants to have camp this summer at defensive back. That's apropos of nothing. They would love to see him at safety and see if he can put that together. But I don't want people to like gloss over the fact that Milan is in this class. I think it's pretty important that Milan Graham, especially because of the Jeremiah Smith constant circus, like Milan Graham is pretty damned important in the Ohio State class of 2024. And much like Jeremiah Smith, like his recruitment was sort of taken for granted because it was always just a matter of when is he going to commit to Ohio State. But then you do see the reaction when he pops up on another campus. People are like, what does this mean? Is he going to flip? I mean, Miami fans on Twitter, oh, something's happening. We're stealing it. Like it's almost like they have no other recruits to go after other than Ohio State recruits. And I do not understand, because it seems like Ohio State keeps winning those battles with them. But Andrew, when you see a guy like Milan Graham on campus somewhere, is the reaction, oh God, here we go again, another more drama? Or is it just, not even a concern?
Not even a concern. I mean, like you said, he's visiting with his teammates. His coach is going down there. And I think most importantly, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the Ohio State staff was well aware of this in advance. He didn't just make a trip down there at random and then send a picture to Brian Hartline of himself on South Beach or anything like that. So, I mean, I think as long as you're communicating with the staff about this, I see no concern whatsoever with the Milan Graham situation right now.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm another program, I think I'm going after Milan Graham with the mindset of, hey, look, at Ohio State fans don't even care if you're visiting somewhere else. Hey, they got Jeremiah Smith. You're just the also ran. You're the complimentary receiver. Milan Graham is a 5-star receiver in Ohio State's eyes. Ohio State was the first school to offer him when they did last summer at a one-day camp. That is a priority recruit for Brian Hartline and the Buckeyes, and they are not taking it for granted. They are not out there overlooking the value of Milan Graham. And so if you see him show up on other campuses because he's there touring with some friends, don't freak out, but also don't dismiss how important he is to the class for Ohio State, because the next receiver, the third one, the complement to Jeremiah Smith and Milan Graham, is the guy that, this is all part of the plan for Brian Hartline. So, there's a lot of things happening. Everyone, what's weird is how early these official visits are going on. And I'm not sure why Georgia's having their big recruiting official visit weekend so early, but is it because they're just paying for all the unofficial visits anyway? And so it doesn't matter because every visit's an official visit to Georgia at this point, or how does that work?
No, you could be right. Honestly, like I forgot that they were even happening now. And then I remembered I saw that Jeremiah Smith's upcoming visit is of the official variety. I completely forgot that it was happening already in mid to late May. So yeah. I
don't know if that's because like in the summer months, some of these big recruiting weekends are now being overtaken by like the OT7, right, tournaments and that kind of stuff. And people are just trying to move those visits up because the whole, you can take as many official visits as you want thing doesn't even start till June 1st. So I guess it doesn't matter at this point. There are no rules and everything's just, open and free, Speaking of open, 4-star prospect Elias Rudolph, defensive end from Deerfield Beach down in Florida, by way of Cincinnati's Taft High School, announced his final 5 schools on Sunday night. Andrew, it is interesting, I suppose, in a way that a kid who went down to Florida in December has only been seen on campuses in the South and in Florida since, released his top 5, and it's Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, Pitt, and Cincinnati. So I think that's a clear sign that he's planning on moving back to the Midwest, probably for his senior year. And this is just a kid who I don't know what to make of where things are with him in Ohio State. They offered him a year ago. He's been back on campus, I think, one time since then. He is moved to Florida. There's a lot of activity going. There's a lot of things in his life that are not inside of his control. And I think that's something people forget. Like, these kids are kids and they have parents and adults in their lives who force them to move here or do this or do that. What do you make of the top 5 for Elias Rudolph? And, you read a lot of the opposing message boards. What is the vibe you're getting elsewhere?
The vibe that I'm kind of getting, and really my initial thought was, where does he stand in the eyes of Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State in those teams? Where do they have him on their board, their hierarchy, that kind of thing? Digging around a little bit, my initial thought was maybe he's going to end up at Cincinnati or Pittsburgh. That was just totally my off the cuff first thought. I too was surprised not to see any Florida schools on there, but again, like you said, maybe that is a sign that he is very likely to be coming back to the Cincinnati area or elsewhere in Ohio. But yeah, I don't know where he's at on these other team boards. That's kind of what I'm wondering.
Yeah, it's just strange because, again, being a kid from Ohio who has an offer for almost a year now, when I think about Ohio State's defensive end recruiting in the class of 2024, which is obviously extremely important in this class, you figure that they probably need 3, maybe 4 in the class. But we talk about Dylan Stewart, we talk about Marquise Lightfoot or Darian Mayo or Edric Houston, and I think Ohio State is like running 1 or 2 in all of those recruitments. So, but we don't talk about Elias Rudolph, and I don't know if it's because he's just so much more raw than those guys, and maybe it's like it's hard to get excited if it's a matter of people not getting as geeked up about Ohio kids as they should when Ohio State offers them. I think sometimes people just dismiss those players and be like, oh, he must not be that good if Ohio State's offering him. I don't know, but it feels like something like is just disconnected in this recruitment. And I am interested just to see where it goes. I know Larry Johnson is expected to visit him this week down at Deerfield Beach. And I think Ohio State's really just trying to gauge like what's going on in your life right now. Where are you mentally? Where are you in this process? And what is going to be important moving forward? It is, as you mentioned, like, where do these schools view him? I know you sent me a screenshot of something from one of the Michigan forums where they said if Michigan wants him, they'll get him. I'm like, okay, I don't know where that. I don't know. I mean, at this point, it's like anyone they want, they're going to get, apparently. But this doesn't feel that cut and dried to me.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. I guess the Jordan Marshall choosing Michigan means that Michigan can get anybody in Ohio. Maybe they get you or I today or tomorrow yet. Who knows?
I'm willing to consider it. Let's hear them out.
Yeah, let's hear the pitch. But no, I think I really do wonder like where Ohio State, Michigan, and even Penn State have him on their boards. I feel like if Ohio State's in a situation like it ran into late 23 cycle, missing out on, all those guys, Damon Wilson, Keon Keeley, Mateo, in that situation, if we run into something like that again, heaven forbid, then maybe that shuffles things around a bit, or maybe this kid comes back to Ohio and just dominates everybody this fall too. Who knows? It's been a quiet recruitment. It's been weird.
Yeah, I think that's the right word for it. It is a weird recruitment. It's hard to follow, and now we don't know where he's going to play his senior year. But I do think what you just brought up is sort of important. If this is a guy that maybe needs a little bit more time to sort things out, that probably works in the favor of Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, as they sort of try to evaluate where he is on their own boards, but also where he is as far as his personal journey. That journey is important. Speaking of personal journeys, Keelan Adams, not a player we talk about a lot on this show to this point, a 4-star wide receiver from Virginia Beach High School. He dropped his top 5 on Saturday. It's Ohio State, it's Virginia Tech, it's Pitt again, which is interesting, South Carolina, and Alabama. So 4-star receiver. Ohio State offered him in April after he visited for the first time. Brian Hartline was sort of watching him back in like January. They were trying to see what this kid's, what type of player he was going to be. More of a slot receiver, similar to Mylan Graham in his size, not nearly as polished yet as Mylan is as a wide receiver, as a route runner, etc. But as we look ahead at the wide receiver position, I think that it is clear that Keelan Adams and Jeremiah McClellan are separating from the pack as far as who's going to be that third receiver. And I think if I had to choose like McClellan or Adams or the field at this point, I would take McClellan or Adams against the field in a wager.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. And who knows, maybe they shoot for the stars with a guy like Micah Hudson or something like that. But I thought the timing of the Adams offer was kind of interesting with 2 already in the fold and then Jeremiah still out there. But I don't know. Do they take 3? Do they take 4? What's that final number going to be? I feel like with Adams' top list of schools, you feel pretty good about Ohio State going up against any of those schools. You know, obviously Alabama's on there too, but for a wide receiver. So yeah. Does Hartline push or what? How do these next few months go?
Yeah, what's interesting is that McClellan and Adams are both expected to make an official visit to Ohio State the same weekend of June 9th. So I think that there's a very real possibility that if they both get to Columbus on June 9th, that they leave in a Hunger Games type situation where someone says, who wants it? And fight for it. One of you guys can have this opportunity. Who's going to take it? I think that is what will happen that weekend. And then Ohio State will have a few months to figure out, do you go after a fourth receiver? Do you continue to evaluate JoJo Trader and see if that maybe opens up, if that opportunity is there? He's good enough and dynamic enough of an athlete that you just bring him in the class no matter what in December, and you don't worry about numbers. But for Keelan Adams and Jeremiah McClellan, what will be fascinating is whether or not there's a conversation with either one of them before that weekend's visit to say, hey, if you don't want to risk being left out in the cold here, maybe you need to jump before you arrive on campus, because if someone else has the opportunity to steal your ball and go home, that's worse than just not giving them a chance, right?
Yeah, I agree. And I honestly thought that McClellan was going to be in 2 months ago, whenever that buzz really started percolating. But here we are. And I don't know what's been the delay on that, or if he just wants to take his time, but we'll see.
Yeah. What's weird to me is that, like, you would have expected, based on what came out of his most recent visit at the end of the March 25th weekend, is that you would have thought that if he's going to schedule official visits, Ohio State would be the last one, just in order to see all the things. But like, he's doing the Ohio State visit the weekend of the 9th of June and has a couple others scheduled after that. So like, it doesn't really line up the way that I think Ohio State would have preferred. But again, that's where you could see perhaps a little leverage being applied to say, hey, is this what you want? Because if you do, you're going to need to let us know right now, because being a wide receiver in Brian Hartline's class is a position that a lot of people want to be in, and not a lot of people have the opportunity. So the desire for someone to take that spot may come. We are moving on to Rando Stuffo. Okay, so Andrew on the OhioState.rivals.com message board posted asking for some questions from folks from our subscribers over there. We're going to read a couple of those and answer them to wrap up this episode of Talking Stuff on the podcast. Andrew, why don't you just lead the way?
Right. So we had a question about the jack position. Obviously, Jack Sawyer kind of in that role last year, now transitioning to more of a traditional defensive end role. And like, what is the future of that position like in terms of recruiting? Like, is it still something they're after? We know they took Joshua Mickens last cycle. He looks like a potential jack. But moving forward, is that even a position we're going to see recruited, or how's that going to work?
Yeah, you're going to see it recruited. Obviously, that's why Ohio State is going after Justin Hill, the highly ranked 4-star linebacker prospect from Winton Woods High School outside of Cincinnati. There's also this kid in the class of 2024. His name is Chris Cole. He is a linebacker edge type down in Virginia and at Salem High School that Ohio State's kind of high on. And they haven't offered yet, but I wouldn't be surprised. Like, if he visits next month and wants to come up in camp, I could see him emerging as an offer candidate for that spot in this class. Right now, I don't know that there's a natural fit in the class of 2024 at that spot other than Booker Pickett. But the question with Booker Pickett is when he's 6'5", 200 pounds, like, is he twitchy enough to be able to do the things you want in coverage at that size? Or is he going to gain 40 pounds and be a true defensive end at 6'5", 240, 250 with a very slight frame? Like, I think it's a weird question for Ohio State. Booker Pickett is still the guy I think most likely in the class of 2024 that would fit it, but there's other players out there that they're evaluating. But the real, like, the dude for that spot is Justin Hill at Winton Woods at 6'4", 210, 220 pounds. He'll be a 235 pounder by the time he's in college. And I think that, you're going to see it recruited. It's just about finding the right fit and finding someone that has the skill set that they can rush the passer, but still be able to be productive in coverage and in, stopping the run. You got to be able to do all the things. You got to be able to do all the things, Right. Not a lot of people
course.
can do all the things.
Renaissance man.
Yeah.
So sticking on the defensive side of the ball, has some questions about cornerback, some for the 2024 class, some for 2025. I know, like, Dakota Fields, he's a California corner, is that right? Just kind of released his top schools. Ohio State made the list. Not a guy we've talked to a lot. I think Oregon is the projected landing spot right now. But anytime there's 2024 recruiting or cornerback talk, that leads to Aaron Scott talk. Aaron Scott has not committed to Michigan yet, so that's good.
Well, I mean, it's only it's only Monday afternoon.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But just in general, where things are at with him, I know he's going to be taking official visits in June, probably a late June or July timeline. Does that all sound accurate still?
Yeah, I would expect something early July. I think it's Ohio State and Michigan at the top. Oregon is in that mix. I just think Oregon's too far away. I wouldn't be surprised by anything that happens, but I would be, and when I say that, like, I would be surprised if he committed to Michigan over Ohio State before he makes official visits. Okay, so let me just say that. Like, the kid has been very adamant from the start that he wants to take visits. Michigan's doing a great job staying involved. They're selling, their depth chart versus Ohio State's. We've talked ad nauseum about that. I think there was an instant reaction from folks a week ago when Ohio State offered to Ryan Nichols from Cincinnati Withrow High School that, oh my gosh, does this mean that Aaron Scott is falling away? Is something happened with Bryce West? Like, it has nothing to do with those things. It doesn't necessarily even have to do with the fact that Xavier Brown or Charles Lester is falling, lower on the board for Ohio State. It's just about playing your odds if you're the Buckeyes, and you need 3 corners in this class. They want 4 corners in this class. So, it's a long shot to recruit kids from California. Ohio State has tried how extensively in the last 6 years to get a kid from Mater Dei High School. How hard have they tried? Pretty freaking hard. Yeah. And they haven't been able to get one yet. So while you are doing everything you can on Xavier Brown front and Charles Lester and Aaron Scott and Bryce West, like, you cannot put yourselves in a position where it's July and all of a sudden Ryan Nichols is committed elsewhere, but and maybe Michigan for him, because they were the team that I think was at the top of the board for Nichols. So now Ohio State offers him. People are, oh, great. Well, now they're only offering him because Michigan offered him, which is just not true. Like, Michigan's offered 315 people in the class of 2024. Ohio State's offered 130. Like, this to say, like, oh, well, Ohio State only offered because Michigan was there first. Like, Michigan's offered a third of the players in the country. So is everyone Ohio State offers from here on out going to be only a reactive offer? Like, what are we doing? Why do we have to say these things?
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And with cornerback recruiting, it's important to remember, they just signed 2 last cycle, and this is going to be a 3 or 4 man class at the position. So I don't think these new offers really mean much of anything.
No, and Dakota Fields is a good player. He's visited Ohio State. They like him. There's still Marcellus Williams out there at Bosco that's on the radar. But you're looking at a class with Bryce West, Aaron Scott, to Ryan Nichols. Ohio State would take all 3 of those guys today. Period. There is not any discussion like, oh, well, if you say yes here, does it impact this? They are going to take the best corners they can. And they would take all 3 of those guys. And then you go hard after Lester or Xavier Brown or Miles Lockhart, who's committing in July. Like, you have a plan. And there was so much consternation a year ago about, oh, well, Ohio State didn't have backup plans in place for the defensive ends. Like, this is all they're doing in this cycle now, is making sure that there's no stone left unturned. and yet it's being perceived as I'm like a panic offer or a reaction to something that hasn't happened yet. Like it's weird. But anyway, sorry, I think I just went off on a tangent.
No, you're fine. And one thing I've gleaned from the various Michigan sites is that there's like a disconnect, kind of like one side of the Michigan media world thinks that Michigan is in the lead. The other site thinks, well, him and Bryce West are probably a package deal. Bryce West is not going to end up at Michigan, so Aaron Scott is not going to end up at Michigan. So I don't know. It's just interesting to see this sort of
and I don't
ideologies.
I don't buy that those two are a package deal. Let me be clear. They do talk a lot. They talk about what the value of being a pair of cornerbacks from Ohio playing at Ohio State, what that can do for the rest of their lives. Like they're aware of that stuff, but it is not a situation where I think it's like, oh, well, whatever Bryce does, I'm doing, or whatever Aaron does, Bryce is doing. Like this is a situation that the players are making their own independent decisions. Now, very likely, I think they will both end up playing at the same school. I think that'll be Ohio State still, but the question is not outside of their own possibility. Like, how does Ohio State win this fight? And they're going to have to put something together for Aaron Scott other than you're from Ohio. So that's the bottom line. But the reaction to Ryan Nichols or Dakota Fields or Charles Lester or Xavier Brown, like all of these things are tied together only in the fact that they all play cornerback and Ohio State's going to take 4 of them. So like which 4 are they going to be? I don't know. I mean, I would imagine that most people would suggest that the likely outcome here is Ohio State signs the 3 from Ohio and Miles Lockhart from Arizona. So now we'll see. Xavier Brown and Charles Lester are the wild cards, and they can change that with one official visit next month. And, again, here we are. It's middle of May. Like those visits are 3 weeks away. So it's not like it's waiting for another year or something like that.
Right. And just sticking with cornerback, 2025 class, this was a question we had too. What are the odds that Jonte Gilbert, the, star corner from Georgia, ends up in the Ohio State class? I've personally just kind of viewed him as a prospect who's out there, not as a commitment, but that's just me. But what are your thoughts on that one?
Well, it's 50%, Andrew. He will either be in the class or he won't. That is always the case. Jonte continues to say all the right things. Like that is all I can say. Like the kid in conversation, and I do speak to him somewhat regularly, like always says the right things. He loves Ohio State, but he's also not oblivious to the fact that there's a lot of other schools out there that are maybe closer to home that are offering him a lot of opportunities. What I think is interesting with his recruitment is like that there's at least been some discussion that he would be considering reclassifying. And I don't know that's, and I don't want to, I'm not trying to start that rumor, to be clear, but I have read it, I think it was on a Georgia Tech message board, that there are people in Atlanta who are suggesting that that's the case. Does that change things? I think it would in a number of ways for him and for Ohio State. So we'll see. I know that he's saying all the right things and that the relationship with Tim Walton and his family is really, really good. And so to me, right, he's committed to Ohio State and he's not changed his mind about that. So until he does, until he's a little bit more public with his decision to reopen things, I don't think people should count him out.
Okay, that's fair. Next question, we'll stick with the defensive side of the ball. So a couple days ago, last week, May 11th, it was, a FutureCast pick came in for Ohio State to land.
That's the
IMG.
Rivals.com version of the crystal ball or the whatever, just for those out there watching, wondering what a FutureCast is.
Yes. A pick came in for Ohio State to land 5-star IMG Academy defensive lineman David Stone. Oklahoma, I think, dominates the rest of the FutureCast picks, but not a name we've talked about a ton. I guess, is that something to just brush to the side? Is it something to pay attention to? Where do you stand on that one?
I think it happened because Larry Johnson was there visiting IMG or something at that day or the day before. David Stone is a really, really good defensive lineman. Really, really good defensive linemen are fascinated with Larry Johnson, and I know that's not a surprise. That's not a secret. That's not something that hasn't been discussed before. But Stone has never visited Ohio State. I think he's been to Oklahoma and Michigan State like 300 times. I don't think he's been anywhere else. So I don't know where or why that would. Don't give that any legs, I guess is what I'm saying. There is certainly the opportunity for him to make an official visit, but like Ohio State's hosting this kid from Louisiana in the next couple of weeks too for an official visit, a defensive lineman whose name is escaping me. It's a 5-star defensive lineman, and I apologize. I'm normally much, my brain is.
I can't help you there.
I'm getting old, but hold on. I'm going to pull it up here. It's a 2025 or 2024 defensive lineman who, this is really great stuff. Dominic McKinley, the defensive tackle from Lafayette down there, 4-star on Rivals, 6'6", 270. Like, he's expected to make an official visit to Ohio State. And again, this is sort of the way Larry Johnson's recruiting is. Like, it moves in a different way than everyone else. Stone hasn't made an unofficial visit. McKinley hasn't been to campus. But if Larry Johnson thinks that he's got a shot to get these kids, then he brings them up for an official visit. And that doesn't happen at other positions for the Buckeyes. They don't take flyers on official visits very often. So if David Stone makes an official visit, if Dominic McKinley makes his official visit that he's talking about, then I guess you have to watch them. But there's not a lot of reason to suspect that those recruitments go Ohio State's direction at this point.
Yeah, that makes sense. Remember when Ohio State almost landed that Rashard Lawrence defensive tackle out of Louisiana?
Yep.
Yeah, that was.
That one's at least different. I mean, Rashard Lawrence visited multiple times, and there was a lot of back and forth. And we're talking about kids here who have been all over the country and have not been to Ohio State. And so, if that's the case, again, when other schools, and I'm not. Andrew, I'm just going to say it. When other schools pay for unofficial visits to happen, then it's easier to make them, right? And so because that happens so frequently, you have to just shake your head and go, okay, how does a team that is trying to do it the right way, and I know that people will scoff and say, oh, Ohio State, they're a bunch of cheaters. They've always cheated. Like, they clearly aren't when it comes to this stuff, doing things that other schools are doing. So how do you as a program get an opportunity to build a relationship with a kid on the same level that other schools are when they are violating rules? Allegedly, it looks to be that way anyway. Whatever. Next.
Reggie Powers. He's not committed to Ohio State yet. He's
took an official visit to Northwestern this past weekend.
Okay, that wasn't official. I wasn't sure what the terminology was for that one, how that was categorized. But I guess, is it just one of those things where Ohio State's just waiting to blow the whistle, put on the green light, he commits, or is it one of those things where he's just simply doing his own due diligence, or what's up with that?
I think it's probably a little bit of A, a little bit of B. I think it started with Ohio State wanting to just get through the spring and see where things are numbers wise and exactly what they need. And then now it starts to unfold that Reggie is going to have some other schools in his ear telling him, hey, they don't want you or they're holding you off, which is, I guess you can make of it what you will. The fact is he has an offer from Ohio State. He has an official visit scheduled to Columbus next month. And I expect him to be in the Buckeyes class by the time June is over.
Okay. That's fair. We have another question from D-Bone Malone.
I love that
Great
guy.
Name. Yeah. Nice name. Would you put money on the side of Ohio State getting one more top offensive lineman, or OSU does not get one more top offensive lineman? Obviously, it depends on what you're considering top. Obviously they're fishing for guys like Brandon Baker and those types of names, but what are the odds of that happening, I guess? I
think they're pretty good. I would say that obviously offensive tackle is a premium position in college football recruiting, like it is in the NFL as far as signing. Like, that's, everyone wants those guys. So Brandon Baker is a relationship that continues to grow and continues to get better. That 1 3-hour visit he made to campus back in March is paid dividends for Ohio State. He immediately scheduled his official visit for June. And then there's Gerby Lambert, who we've talked about, who doesn't do a lot of conversation, very close to Justin Fry, though. I think the Ohio State's in a position to get one of those guys. And I know they really like Daniel Cruz down there in Texas as well. So I would imagine the goal has been 6 offensive linemen in this class. And if you can be patient, I think you'll see 6 offensive linemen in this class.
Makes sense. One more quick one before we get to the last segment, which is going to be the in or out, of course.
Oh, okay, of course.
Yeah. Zay 2400 asked if there's any updates on the TJ Moore recruitment. Obviously, we talked about some receivers earlier, and TJ Moore is a kid I just consistently forget about, which is my own dumbness. But what's up with that?
Brian Hartline visited him, I think not this past week, but the week before. Just hasn't been up to Ohio State, and I don't imagine that one's going to happen at this point. And I think there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, it seems like TJ wants to stay closer to home in the South. Clemson is one of those teams that's really involved. Alabama's getting there. Georgia's involved. But primarily it's when you put him and Jeremiah Smith side by side, they're sort of playing the same position. And I think that has kept TJ from saying, hey, I want to be there. I'm going to look deeper at Ohio State, because when you look at Graham and Jeremiah Smith, both sort of outside guys, even though they're very different receivers, they're both outside guys. I just think that it lines up, unfavorably for Ohio State.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, last thing here. This is going to be in or out. We've got 5 names.
In or out? 5 names.
All of the defensive variety.
Nobody cares about offense anymore.
I know, it's like whatever. These come courtesy of Ebron84. I'm a big fan of his. He is a beer aficionado, which I appreciate. So, 5 names. Number 1, 5-star Georgia safety KJ Bolden.
I mean, it's just it's hard to say in. Like I can't. It's one of those things where, like, if it's Ohio State versus Georgia, you're like, hey, you got a fighting chance. Flip a coin, anything can happen. This is Ohio State versus Alabama, Georgia, Clemson. Like, they have to slay 5 giants here to win this battle, and I think they can do it, but I don't think they will. I'll say out.
What if I told you that I feel better about Ohio State landing Peyton Woodyard than I do Ohio State landing KJ Bolden? Would you agree or disagree with that assessment?
I mean, I don't think that is entirely wrong. I obviously understand the challenge of recruiting Peyton Woodyard as well, considering he's been committed to Georgia, and now he's helping recruit other guys to Georgia. But I do think the relationship with Woodyard and Ohio State is just as good as the relationship with KJ Bolden and Ohio State. But we'll see them both on campus in June for official visits, and then you go. But I just think that the challenge is harder when it comes to Bolden, because, as I said, there's a line of teams you're trying to overthrow here, and not just one, like you are in the Woodyard fight.
Yep, that makes sense. Okay, last 4, all defensive line, starting with Marquise Lightfoot.
I'm going to say in. Now, work to do. That's an Ohio State-Michigan battle, I think, more than anything else. But I like where Ohio State stands, and the relationship that he has with Larry Johnson is really, really good. I'll say in.
Sounds good. Ohio State versus the SEC for Dylan Stewart.
I mean, it's similar, I think, to the KJ Bolden thing, where you like, I understand why Ohio State can win that battle. I understand why people are looking at the depth chart and saying they should win that battle. And I'm just going to go out on a limb and give Larry Johnson his flowers and say that he's going to pull that one off and win it. So I'm going to say in for Dylan Stewart, because Ohio State's defensive end position situation is so wide open for a guy like that to come in and get an opportunity to play early in offense. So I'm going to say in, but I realize how that could go anyway, based on what happens in the next month.
Okay, so Stewart and Lightfoot in. That would be 2 edge guys. Another edge guy, legacy, Booker Pickett.
I'm going to say out. I think he's going to end up at Miami. I think some of that is because Ohio State does not know what he's going to be and don't know exactly how to project where his frame fills out. And I think that by the time you get a real sense of what that's going to be, it may be too late to go all in there.
Another Jack candidate, though, maybe. I guess it's just hard with his size and all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, he's the guy. Like, you just don't know how he fits.
Yeah. Buford, Georgia defensive lineman, Edric Houston. That's the last one.
I think the Buckeyes are going to get Edric Houston. I've said it for a few months. I've had him on my written prediction at ohiostate.rivals.com. I just think that there's a fit there that is different than other places. And again, Buford is a weird place. I do think he will be in eventually. I just like the fit. And if you can get those 3 defensive linemen, anything else you do, like a guy like Elias Rudolph or whatever, like is totally gravy. So, and I think Ohio State's also in a really good spot, as I said, for like Darian Mayo. I mean, there's opportunities out there to do things. All these battles are against the same teams. Darian Mayo and Marquise Lightfoot are both basically Ohio State, Michigan, and a few others in the discussion. So, like this, they can't all go to the same place, I guess is what I'm saying. And there will certainly be some splitting of the baby. I think like Kingston Villanueva, like I think Ohio State's going to get him if we want to add him to the in or out game. Notre Dame now has 3 linebackers committed. Ohio State has 2. That doesn't really matter that much, but at the same time, like you can't just ignore it. I think that the recruitment of Villanueva, Peyton Pierce, and Garrett Stover are doing a great job, like with that battle. Maybe family wants him to go to Notre Dame because the degree is a little bit stronger, but like if you're going to play football, you can play football and get a degree at Ohio State, and it's still pretty valuable when it comes to the overall network of what being an Ohio State grad can do. And I think that's a battle that Jim Knowles and James Laurinaitis will win. That's just a little bonus in a route.
There you go. But after last cycle's struggles on the defensive line, that would be a nice bounce back. No other way to put it. So.
And I think it's obvious that Ohio State understands how important this defensive line class is, not just for the short term, but the long term of the program. Like you have to have the next wave in place, and it does feel like it's been waiting to get some momentum. But all those guys are going to be on campus in the next month, and Larry Johnson's going to make his money, and he's going to earn it or he's not, I guess, because certainly people. Understandably don't think that happened a year ago. Now, if that happens 2 years in a row, that's a major issue for the Buckeyes. So anything else, Andrew, today, or think we can call it a sweet,
I think we can
night.
call it. Yeah, there were other questions, but we can't get to them all. I think we covered some of the big ones, especially the repetitive ones. So I think all's good.
I'll do my best to try to answer the rest of them at ohiostate.rivals.com. You can join using promo code DTE30 to get your first month of a subscription free, where you can hang out with myself and Andrew and Austin Ward and Bill Landis and our subscribers over there. We really do appreciate you watching, listening, however you are taking this in. It means a lot to us. Please like the show on YouTube, subscribe, click the little bell so that you're notified when we got new content and that kind of stuff. All those things go a long way toward helping us grow so we can continue to bring this type of content and more to you on the podcast. That's Andrew Ellis. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. This has been Talking Stuff. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.